What's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Doug's Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, with Scoop Doug on 3, coming to you on Friday, June 20th, 2025, the last official visit weekend of the month of June is here. And the Ducks have the number 7 class according to the On3 Industry rankings, and they have some more targets heading to town. So if you guys are interested in that, make sure to head on over to scoopduck.com, where we have tons of content out previewing the big weekend for Oregon out there in Eugene. But the main focus for this episode that you're listening to right now, that you're watching right now here on YouTube, is a new commitment. 5-star Las Vegas, Nevada, Bishop Gorman safety Jett Washington has announced his commitment to Oregon in what is another marquee recruiting win for secondary coach Chris Hampton at the safety position at Oregon. Washington is one of the very best out west, coming out of a powerhouse program like Bishop Gorman that just runs the state of Nevada every year. And then they also play a national schedule and make a lot of noise there as well. So that's definitely part of the reason why this Washington pickup is so significant for Oregon. Jett Washington committed to Oregon from a top 3 that also included Alabama and USC. But really, for my money, this came down to Oregon and Alabama. So we're going to break down this commitment from all angles and talk about why this is such a big pickup for Oregon here in the 2026 recruiting class. Let's get into a little bit of the rankings rundown for Jett Washington, the newest member of Oregon's 2026 class. According to the On3 Industry ranking, he is the number 26 prospect nationally, the number 3 safety, and the number 1 prospect in the state of Nevada. He comes in at right around 6'4", 6'4.5", and 200 pounds. I think in his X bio, he's listed himself at 208 pounds. So this is a really, really big safety. And I know that some Oregon fans might think about Kingston Lopa when you think about bigger safeties that have that longer frame. Also think about Brian Addison from a couple of years ago. He is definitely one of those bigger safeties that was quite productive during his time at Oregon. And we know, of course, that he opted to transfer to UCLA to wrap up his college football career back home in Los Angeles with the Bruins. But man, this is a huge get for Oregon. I know that Duck fans are really excited about this addition. Let me know what you guys think. If you're watching here on YouTube, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this Jett Washington pickup, and let me know what you think about Oregon's 2026 recruiting class as we're at, I should say, a critical juncture here in the 2026 class, the 2026 cycle. Throwing on some tape now for Jett Washington, Oregon's newest commit here in the 2026 class. Highlights are a little bit on the shorter end, but they're still definitely good to throw on here. So you guys, the listeners, you guys, the viewers, can get a better sense of who we're talking about here on this podcast. So let's get into this a little bit and talk about kind of the story of Jett Washington's recruitment, because I think for someone who has committed to Oregon, he really hasn't visited all that much or all that frequently for a guy that Oregon has distance on their side in this recruitment, being that they were not too far away over there in Eugene. And then obviously you had Alabama all the way across the country in the Southeast in Tuscaloosa. But he visited for the Ohio State game. Then he came back out in the spring, and then he came back for an official visit. So as far as I know, only 3 visits to Oregon, but Oregon kind of helped bridge the gap here because they hit the recruiting trail themselves. The coaches did. Dan Lanning, Tosh the Boy, Chris Hampton. Actually, I don't know if Dan Lanning went, because I know there's the Saban rule that prevents head coaches from going on the road. So maybe I have to walk that one back. I know that Chris Hampton and Tosh the Boy went to go see him. But the Oregon staff, moral of the story, long way to say this, they went out to see him twice during the January evaluation period, seeing him at Bishop Gorman, and then also going out to see him at one of his basketball games for the Gales. And that's a huge part of what makes this addition so significant for Oregon is that you're getting just an elite athlete, because he's also a really good player, really good basketball player. And I posted this I said this in my first video that I posted after this news dropped. But unless you've been living under a rock, I'm sure you know that he's the nephew of the late Kobe Bryant. So he's definitely got some elite athletic DNA on his side, and that he's bringing to the table. So back to the visit picture, because I think that that's really part of the story in this recruitment. I said back in the spring, and obviously I maintained it up until he committed, that I think Oregon had a really good shot with Jett Washington just from the jump, really. Obviously, Oregon loves to recruit the West Coast, but they were a team that kind of gradually picked up steam with Jett Washington. And like I said, got him on campus a couple of times. More recently, for the official visit, he actually moved that trip up and opted to cancel his Ohio State visit, or reschedule it, whatever you want to say. It didn't end up happening, so you may as well say that he canceled it in order to get to Oregon for his official visit earlier this month. So I think that that was probably part of the staff wanting to move it up, and probably part of him wanting to get back to Oregon. And I know in my interviews with him, he's raved about the culture that Dan Lanning has built out there in Eugene. He was talking to On3 director of recruiting Chad Simmons, and said that just the fit at Oregon is right for me. And it's a great pickup, because you want to have elite safeties, elite defensive backs. You want elite players everywhere, of course, but you really want to have those top end athletes there in the secondary. And that is certainly what the Ducks are getting here in Jett Washington. I'm just scrolling a little bit to try to get some background on some of the quotes that I've gotten from Washington about Oregon just in the past, and some of my interviews. So trying to do that on the fly here. So apologies for not being a little bit quicker here. But this is from my interview with him after he visited for a spring practice, and he said that the Ducks definitely went up. He said, quote, "It was great being back, getting the feel for the environment, the people, and kind of just seeing the area again. My mom's first time down there, so kind of just being able to get a feel and be around the people again." So the people were a big part of it. He got to sit in on meetings, plenty of one-on-one time with Tosh Lupoi, Chris Hampton, and Dan Lanning, and just getting a good feel for kind of what things are like. And he mentioned that that was kind of a slower visit for him. Like I said, he went to the Ohio State game, which was just absolutely insane. I was there for that game, and it was easily one of my favorite experiences in Eugene since I've been covering the Ducks on this beat. So that was just fantastic, but that's a separate story for a separate day. But Jett Washington was in town for the Ohio State game, and it was kind of hectic, but that spring visit, I think, really helped Oregon kind of gain some ground in that recruitment, like he said himself, because it was able to kind of slow things down, get a more up close look at the program, and get a lot of his questions answered. So the other thing that he highlighted, of course, the culture, saying, quote, "Since Dan Lanning's got there, every single year they've had more draft picks and just a better record every single year." And the fact that they're trending in the right direction. So those are some of the things that ultimately made Jett Washington comfortable with selecting Oregon for his college football. And now that where do I want to go with this? Just now that he is in the fold, Oregon has two safeties, or you could say one true safety and a nickel, and Xavier Larice, the talented, versatile DB out of the state of Florida. He just took his official visit last weekend to Oregon. And in fact, this week he was supposed to visit Florida State for an official this weekend, but this week he said that he's not taking any other official visits, and he's locked in with the Ducks. So I think you take that with a grain of salt, as I think you would with any recruit shutting down their recruitment. I think we have a long way to go, and nothing's really truthfully shut down until the pen meets paper, or in some cases even until they enroll at their school of choice. But now Jett Washington joins Xavier Larice out there in the secondary, and really, I think, shows that Oregon can capitalize with one of their absolute priority targets, and a guy out west for sure. I think the fact that he is on the West Coast or in the Western region makes him that much more of a priority. for Oregon, especially when you're going up against some really big heavy hitters on the recruiting trail, like an Alabama and like a USC, who has the number one class in the country right now. And part of the reason I think this one trended to Oregon before the picks kind of started coming in for the Ducks to land Washington, Jira Edwards, the St. Francis Academy safety that the Ducks have also been targeting and recruiting this class, he got predicted to Alabama after an official visit with the Tide. So it seemed like the Tide were really prioritizing him. And it's kind of just the way modern recruiting goes. You can't land them all. And because Oregon's class is pretty small, I think that they obviously really circled Washington as one of those top targets in their class. I think I've written previously over on Scoop Duck that Washington's a top 3 target overall in this recruiting class. So I think that that's obviously huge when you kind of make that, when you make that kind of a statement and recruit a guy this hard, you definitely want to land him. And I think the Oregon staff felt like he was an absolute must get in this class. So we're going to talk a little bit more now about what's next for Oregon at the safety position now that Jett Washington is in the fold. The biggest name that is kind of on people's radar is Joey O'Brien, the elite safety out of LaSalle College out there in Pennsylvania. He's expected to come off the board later on this afternoon, and he'll choose from a top 4 of Oregon, Notre Dame, Clemson, and Penn State. Kind of feels like this one is coming down to Notre Dame and Oregon, but I'll just rip the Band-Aid off. I've placed my prediction for Notre Dame to land him. They also landed a commitment from Kari Adams, the 2026 corner out of the state of Maryland, earlier on today on Friday, and he was originally scheduled to take his official visit out to Oregon, but probably safe to say that that won't be happening now. I know that Justin Hopkins reported over on Scoop Duck earlier this week that it didn't sound like he was going to make it out to Oregon for his official visit. And that is kind of when Notre Dame really picked up some steam with Kari Adams. But I think that Joey O'Brien has been to Notre Dame quite a few times. And to Oregon's credit, he's been to Oregon 3 times. But that's not really a guy that they've prioritized for a long time. I don't think he's even gotten on campus for a game or before the calendar year of 2025. So it definitely feels like a situation where Oregon was kind of working from behind the 8 ball in that recruitment for Joey O'Brien, but they still have some other safeties that they're going after. I just talked a little bit about Jira Edwards and how Alabama looks like they're the team to be in his recruitment. I did reach out to him to see if he was going to be visiting Oregon this weekend for his official visit, but he just said, I'm not doing any interviews right now. So I'll take that to mean that he is probably not going to be making it out to Eugene this weekend. Taking a little sip of coffee here on a Friday afternoon. I'm your host, Max Torres. Thank you guys so much for being here for another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a quick favor, hit the like button and subscribe to the Scoop Duck On3 YouTube channel. And if you guys are listening to us on podcast, follow, subscribe, share wherever you guys get your podcasts. We would greatly appreciate it. So just kind of wrapping up a little bit more now on the safety picture for Oregon and Chris Hampton here in the 2026 recruiting cycle. The Ducks signed one safety last year in Trey McNutt, who was a 5-star out of Cleveland, Ohio. And now they have 2 in the fold, with Jett Washington being the guy that you kind of feel is a true safety, with Xavier Larice maybe being a nickel star kind of type of guy in this class. I really think the biggest name you have to watch now is Devin Jackson out of the state of Florida. He was a guy that Oregon has really come on strong for, definitely late in this recruitment, but from what I've been able to gather in the interviews that I've done with Jackson, he's been really receptive of Oregon in his recruitment. And this is a guy who, like I said, from Winter Garden, Florida, the first academy, he's a 4-star guy, 6'2", 195 pounds. And he took his official visit out to Oregon earlier this month. But Oregon's got some pretty stiff competition in this recruitment. Florida, the Gators are battling to get him back in the fold. Maybe a recommitment could be something that we see down the line. And in the past, recommitments were really pretty rare, but maybe they're becoming a bit more common now. Jared Curtis recommitted to Georgia, the 5-star quarterback out of the state of Tennessee. That was a guy that Oregon was recruiting pretty heavily. And then who else do we have? That's the main one that comes to mind. But As far as Devin Jackson's recruitment goes, you have Florida in there. You have Miami. They also got an official visit from Devin Jackson. It looks like he's going to be at Nebraska this weekend. So Nebraska is definitely one to keep an eye on here this cycle. But I feel like of the remaining targets for Oregon, I think that Devin Jackson is definitely the one that you feel the best about Oregon maybe adding to this class. I'm still trying to kind of sync up with him and get an interview after that official visit out to Oregon, but he's going to be spending his weekend out there in Lincoln with Matt Rule and the Cornhuskers. So we'll make sure to keep tabs there and kind of monitor what's next for Oregon at the safety spot. Gonna take another double check at who the Ducks have offered at safety to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody at the position. But the secondary recruiting under Chris Hampton, specifically at safety, I think has been really, really good. So I think that's something that you got to be excited about if you're an Oregon fan and you're just looking down the line at the future of the safety position and what the Ducks are going to be able to do there. Okay, let's see. I got all the targets out of the way, so that's great. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, this may be the last section of the pod. Maybe I'll wrap up with some thoughts on the official visit weekend. But the other thing I wanted to talk about here, let me see if I can pull it up, is just the caliber of safeties that Oregon has not just been recruiting, but landing under Chris Hampton since he came over from Tulane and took over coaching the safeties at Oregon, and of course got the co-defensive coordinator tag. I think that Chris Hampton has been a phenomenal addition for Oregon as a recruiter and as a coach. And I think this year is a little bit of a prove it year for him at the safety spot, right? Because the Ducks lost all of their starters from a year ago in the secondary. So now you have kind of a blank slate with some guys that you recruited. Obviously, Dylan Thieneman comes over from Purdue. So that's big. And it's just going to be fun to see what Hampton's ultimately going to be able to do with this group, a young group aside from Thieneman, but one that has no shortage of talent, definitely no shortage of talent for Chris Hampton heading into this year and getting Oregon's defense ready to go once again in Big Ten play. So here you go. I found the tweet, had to improvise a little bit, but if you're watching on YouTube, it's just my tweet, my post on X, looking at the safeties that Oregon has signed in the last 3 prep recruiting classes, including the 2026 class. And we're obviously assuming that these guys are going to sign, but 2026, 2025, and 2024. So in 2026, you got Jett Washington. He's an Under Armour All-American, top 30 prospect according to the On3 Industry and the national rankings. 4-star Xavier Larice. He's not ranked super high, but my God, that dude's got every offer in the book. I mean, I think it's like 40 offers that he has to his name. So Xavier Larice, ranking or not, I think you got to look at the offer sheet and just look at how many elite programs are going after him. And then 2025, pretty small safety haul for Chris Hampton, but you got Trey McNutt, 5-star guy. You went after some other ones in that class, but Trey McNutt is by all intents and purposes a guy that could find his way onto the field this year. I don't think that you expect it just because Oregon hasn't really played a lot of young defensive backs, certainly not in big time important games or snaps. But I think that would be something that's on the table. They haven't had a young safety who's played like a really prominent role since Javon Holland, and he ended up in the NFL. So if you see Trey McNutt on the field early this year, that could be a bit of an indication about where his long-term trajectory lies. And then in the 2024 class, you had a pair of 4-stars in Kingston Lopa out of the Sacramento area in Northern California. And then also Aaron Flowers, who was a Navy All-American from the state of Texas out there in Forney. And that was one that I think came down to Oregon and USC, if memory serves. So that was another big win on the trail for Chris Hampton. And then you can also add, if you wanted to, I guess technically he's a transfer, but you can also definitely mention Peyton Woodyard from Bellflower, California, St. John Bosco, Trinity League, a program I've spent a ton of time around, covered Peyton quite a bit when he was coming out of high school. He committed to Alabama, and then Nick Saban announced his retirement following their playoff run that season, and then Kalen DeBoer took over as the following head coach as his successor. and Peyton hopped in the portal. Woodyard hopped in the portal and ended up picking Oregon. I think there's a lot of reasons there. You have the relationship with Rashad Wadood, Tosh Lapoy, and also the schematic overlap between Oregon and St. John Bosco. They run a similar style of defense, excuse me. So really, really good talent that you're looking at here these past 3 cycles for Oregon. And then we can just also talk about some of the transfers that they've had. Kobe Savage from Kansas State, Tyshim Johnson from Ole Miss, some of the more recent guys. And then you have Evan Williams, who came over from Fresno State, and he ended up becoming an NFL draft pick. He's with the Packers now. Then you have Jaden Kennedy from Ole Miss, who had some ties to Hampton, and then, of course, Dylan Thieneman from Purdue. So I think it remains to be seen depending on the level of play this year. That's why I said this is kind of like a prove-it year for Hampton. But, man, there are a few positions that have been overhauled more than safety, I would say, since Dan Lanning got hired, and they've needed it. Because I'll say it flat out, I don't think that Oregon's safety play was, or really the secondary as a whole, but I don't think it was where it needed to be last year. And that was ultimately something that prevented them from getting where they wanted to go. They got destroyed by Ohio State, and it was just really hard to slow down Jeremiah Smith. But hey, get in line if you're Oregon, right? Every other school in the country had a hard time stopping Jeremiah Smith. But the point I'm getting at there, I think that the secondary play is part of what has kind of been preventing Oregon or holding them back from taking that next step as an elite defense. We know that the pass rush has been great. The run defense has been pretty solid. But being more disruptive in the passing game and having an elite secondary is kind of where I think Oregon has some room to grow. And Kingston Lopa and Aaron Flowers are 2 of those guys that I think could be in line for some pretty good snaps this year. Probably stands to reason that Dylan Thieneman is going to be one of your starters, but Kingston Lopa got some great play time in the Big Ten championship game against Penn State. And he's a guy who kind of has a similar build to Washington, right? 6'4", 6'5", freakish athlete. Are some of those things that get tossed around when I'm talking to people about Kingston Lopa. So he's got a little bit of snaps under his belt. Aaron Flowers is a guy that this staff has been really excited about, but we haven't seen too much of him since he's gotten to Oregon. And I think part of the reason for that is because of the veterans that you saw ahead of him in the secondary. And typically, if a team is bringing a guy in from the transfer portal, I think it's just because they think that he can make an immediate impact and a big difference on the team that year. But I think it's also, to some degree, I'm not saying specifically for Flowers, but for any position group, probably also speaks to your relative confidence about the guys you have on the roster at that position. So case in point here, I think that the trajectory and the arrow for Oregon's safeties is going way up. Jett Washington is the latest example of that, with Oregon landing a commitment from the 5-star defensive back on Thursday. Already gotten pretty deep into it, so I don't want to add too much to this episode of the pod, but Oregon is hosting their last weekend of official visitors. You have 2 big names at quarterback, and Matt Ponatoski and Bryson Beaver from the Elite 11 finals. Beaver is from Southern California, recent Boise State decommit. And then you also have Ponatoski from the state of Ohio, dual sport guy, absolute stud on the baseball diamond. Those are the 2 guys that you're watching there at quarterback in Eugene this weekend if you're an Oregon fan. But the biggest visitor, probably without a doubt, I would say, is 5-star plus offensive tackle Emmanuel Ihenicho from Baltimore, Maryland, Georgetown Preparatory School. That's Oregon's top offensive lineman in the 2026 class, their top target, I should say, in the 26 class. And that's kind of been the case since Jackson Cantwell chose Miami earlier on this cycle. And this is the last official visit for Ihenicho, who has, I believe it's an August 5th commitment date set, but maybe he gets on campus this weekend. I know Oregon has to kind of battle distance here and try to win over the family in that regard. But if all goes well, maybe you see that one move a little bit faster than you expected, right? So I think those are some of the biggest visitors you got to look at. Jalen Lott, a really talented receiver out of the state of Texas. He's taking his last official visit with the Ducks, and he's probably going to make his college commitment in early July, it's looking like. So Nick Abrams is another one. He's a really good linebacker out of Maryland that you have to keep an eye on. Oregon's battling Georgia, Alabama, and Michigan there. But I mean, I'm getting going here for a whole separate episode of the pod, but the case in point is that there are a lot of big-time official visitors coming to Eugene this weekend. A lot of big-time targets for Oregon in the 2026 class are visiting elsewhere. If you're looking for a much more in-depth breakdown, you can find all of that over at scoopduck.com. Great time to check us out with Oregon poised for a run on the recruiting trail here in the 2026 class. A lot of decisions, a lot of commitment dates coming up. And then before you know it, we're going to be in fall camp, and we're going to have plenty to talk about with this Oregon team in 2025. So we'd love to have you be a part of it. Join thousands of other Duck fans over on the message boards and just join the community that we're building over at Scoop Duck. And we greatly appreciate it if you did just that. Find me anywhere at Torres Sports, that name right there on your screen. Subscribe to the Scoop Duck On3 YouTube channel. And do me a favor, share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. But greatly appreciate you guys tuning in. And we'll catch you guys in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.